For me, it's more rewarding to save a piece of history rather than to create one. In other words, I get more satisfaction from restoring an old piece of furniture rather than building a new one. This is an old sewing machine cabinet. I've obviously started tearing it apart already. It belonged to the grandfather of my customer. This grandfather worked as a tailor for Hart, Schaffner & Marks, which is a company in the Chicago area that's been making suits since 1887. This machine had always been set up in a spare bedroom in that grandfather's home. Now the granddaughter wants to have this restored, but time has not been good to this cabinet. It's been in basement floods, it's got cracks and splits all over it. For most people, this is beyond repair. But I'm going to show you some cool woodworking tips and tricks to get this thing restored and repaired. Welcome to Alley Picked. Whenever I begin a new restoration project, I always have to decide how detailed I want to get. My customer Cindy wants this to look nice and to be sturdy. The sewing machine doesn't need to be functional. The inside doesn't need to be completely refinished, only cleaned and perhaps a new coat of finish. The first step is to make repairs on all the broken pieces. The doors are made of plywood, and due to water damage, all the plies at the bottom have been separated. The bottom of the cabinet has fallen off and half of it is missing. The bottom of the outside doors look like it's missing a piece of the decorative trim. I'll start by taking apart as much as possible. It does make the work easier if the pieces are removed from the cabinet. The side panel has completely split in two. I'll glue all the loose parts before re-gluing the two halves back together. This is the part of the show where I answer your questions.
Mail time! The mail's here!
Okay, to be honest, nobody's asking me any questions, but this is the part of the show where I answer my own question because I find it interesting. And today's question, Tom, why do you buy things when you don't need them? This cabinet is a perfect example. The bottom of this cabinet is all busted out. This is all that's left. It's a solid piece of oak that I need to replace with a larger piece to cover the whole bottom. So I've got to go out and buy either one piece or two piece, piece them together and make a new bottom. Oh, but wait, about 3 weeks ago I happened to be at a garage sale. I picked up these solid oak shelves for $1 a piece. They're going to work out perfect for the bottom, and now I don't have to go out and spend more money. And that answers today's question. Tom, why do you buy things when you don't need them? The right side of the cabinet has a lot of splits where the water penetrated. When this happens, you usually can't close these gaps by clamping it. So I've cut these small wedges, glue them up, press them in, and let them dry. And once they're sanded and stained, they're going to hardly be noticeable. The bottom of the back side of the cabinet also has some severe damage where all the plies have separated. I need to get glue between each of the plies. I'm going to squeeze some glue in there and get it to penetrate deeply by using a small wedge I cut on my table saw. Once the glue's in there, I'll clamp it up, but not before applying this painter's tape to seal up the cracks and keep my wood braces from sticking to the wood surface when all that glue starts to ooze out. After that dries, it'll be good as old. Now I need to attack the biggest problem, the doors. The bottom of the doors have separated into many plies that make up the plywood. Since the doors are curved, I can't use a flat piece of wood to clamp like I did on the back side. What I'll do is use the good part of the door to make up a wood template that's the same shape. I can then use these templates to clamp all the plies back together. Get the glue between all of the plies and let it penetrate deep into the crevice. More painter's tape to avoid sticking and oozing where I don't want the glue to go. I'm using C-clamps because they can exert much more pressure than the standard hand clamps. Now I'm going to need to remove all of the finish. This is the worst part of the job. I'm using a scraper, which does help to make this a lot easier. I made a video on this scraper if you're interested in learning more about it. Just click on the link in the upper right hand corner. Since my scraper is oval, I'm going to use a sharp chisel as a scraper. This allows me to get all the way into the corners where it's often difficult to remove the finish, even for sandpaper. I'll follow this up by using 150 grit sandpaper. Here's what the door looked like before. Here's what it looks like now. These are the shelves I showed you earlier. I cut one of the shelves into 2 pieces because it was slightly cupped. Splitting it in 2 and placing the pieces on the outside makes the cupping less noticeable. Let's talk about staining. First, Minwax Dark Walnut Oil Based is my favorite stain. I don't know how they make this formula, but this semi-transparent dark walnut color is awesome. I can get so many different color variations using this product. As you see, this is lighter than the original color. I'll let this coat dry and then apply a second coat. Another technique I like to use to get it darker is to wipe off most of the stain with a rag, but not all of it. Then I take a dry brush and lightly brush the surface in the direction of the grain. This leaves a nice, slightly darker coat on the surface. It does take longer to dry, so be patient. This is the new bottom of the cabinet I made using those repurposed shelves. I cut a groove into one side to match the cabinet. And here are the 4 pocket hole screws I used on the bottom for added strength. This part of the door was missing. I cut this piece of oak, which is about the same thickness. I think that'll be an adequate replacement for the missing piece. This part of the sewing machine is the top under the flip out lid. I don't want to refinish this part. It's got the original tape measure under the finish, and I just couldn't replicate that. I'll use some paint thinner on steel wool to clean and prepare the surface for 1 coat of polyurethane. Always stir the poly gently since there is some separation. I'm using semi-gloss to closely match the original finish. This is a nice bristle brush for varnishes. I usually buy these at estate sales, often as new old stock. Some people have mentioned to me that after they brush on the poly, they get a lot of air bubbles. You can usually avoid this by not shaking the can, just stir gently. Then, after applying the poly, take the brush and with very gentle strokes, just the weight of the brush, pull it in the direction of the grain. Another way to avoid bubbles that I'm experimenting with is to use a heat gun. This also seemed to help quite a bit. This is the back of the cabinet. You might think that all of the finish needs to be stripped off and sanded down to the bare wood. Not so. This is the magic of the dark walnut stain. I prepared the surface by sanding any loose particles. I also used the sandpaper to blend the look of the part at the bottom, which has no stain, to the part on the top that has both stain and finish. That, to me, is amazing. It has a beautiful, rich, and deep color. For the inside, I didn't remove all the finish, just gave it a good sanding. The stain's going to cover all the variations in color. Now it's time to reassemble. Often with old furniture, when you replace the screws, the holes are stripped. Simply take a dowel or toothpick and put it into the hole to take up space. This will allow you to tighten the screw snugly. I'll give every surface, including the metal, a coat of this DIY oil wax mixture. When regluing any joints, be sure to remove as much of the old glue as possible. This cabinet didn't have a key for this lock. Fortunately, I bought a bag of old keys at an estate sale earlier this year, and I happen to have one that fits perfectly. Another example of buying things when you don't need them. I also have this keyhole cover from another lock which fits perfectly into the door opening.